Rain fell in heavy sheets, turning the city into a blur of water and cold light from the street lamps. Her shoes were soaked through, squelching with every step, and the thin soles could no longer keep out the icy water. The old umbrella she clutched was bent and torn, its fabric flapping uselessly in the wind. Every gust pushed against her, making it harder to walk. Her coat, meant for autumn weather, clung to her body, heavy and wet. She pulled it tighter, but the cold still crept in, making her shiver. She had been walking for hours, going from one shelter to another, only to be told there was no room left. At each place, the volunteers gave her apologetic looks but shook their heads. Some suggested trying again in the morning, but she didn't have anywhere to wait until morning. The streets were dangerous at night, especially for a woman alone, and she was not alone in her body anymore. Her hands instinctively rested on her swollen belly, feeling the faint kicks. The baby was moving less now, and worry twisted inside her chest. She needed rest, warmth, and food, but all she had was the cold, wet night. She stopped under the awning of a closed store to catch her breath, leaning against the glass. Inside, mannequins stood in perfect poses, wearing coats that looked thick and warm. She wished she could trade places with one, standing safe inside, untouched by the rain. But the streets kept calling her forward. People passed without looking at her, heads down, rushing to their own destinations. Some crossed the road to avoid her, as if the sight of a drenched pregnant woman was too much to bear. She tried not to take it personally, but every averted glance made her feel smaller. Her bag was light because she had so little left. Inside were a few pieces of clothing, a bottle of water, and a blanket that was more holes than fabric. She had sold her phone weeks ago to afford meals, and now even those meals had run out. She didn't know where she would sleep, but she knew she had to keep moving. Standing still made the cold sink deeper into her bones. She took a deep breath, tightened her grip on the broken umbrella, and stepped back into the rain. The traffic roared past her, headlights briefly lighting her face before disappearing into the night. The puddles along the sidewalk had grown into shallow lakes, forcing her to step into the street or risk soaking her feet even more. Each splash sent icy water up her legs, and she bit her lip to stop herself from crying out. Her steps became slower, each one an effort. The weight of the baby made her hips ache, and the strain on her back was becoming unbearable. Still, she pushed forward, telling herself she only needed to find one open door. The city smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust fumes. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, echoing off the buildings. She turned down a quieter street where the light was dimmer and the shops were closed. It was quieter here, but that only made her more aware of her own breathing and the pounding of her heart. Her vision blurred for a moment, and she stopped to steady herself. Hunger gnawed at her, making her dizzy. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten more than a piece of bread. The baby needed food. She needed food. But there was nothing. She walked past a small diner, its neon sign still glowing, but when she tried the door, it was locked. The smell of fried food lingered in the air, making her stomach twist painfully. She pressed her forehead against the glass for a moment, wishing she could be inside, holding a hot cup of tea. Then she forced herself to step away. Wishing wouldn't help her. A flash of movement caught her eye. A sleek black car rolled slowly alongside her, its tires hissing against the wet road. She felt the hair on the back of her neck rise. She had learned to be cautious. Strangers stopping in the middle of the night could mean trouble. She quickened her pace, hoping it would move on, but the car matched her speed. The window rolled down with a smooth hum, and a man's face appeared in the dim light. He was well-dressed, his suit crisp despite the weather, his hair neat as if untouched by the wind. He didn't look like someone who belonged on this street at this hour. His eyes studied her, calm but intense, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Her grip on her bag tightened. She wanted to keep walking, but her legs felt too tired to carry her much farther. The man leaned slightly forward and spoke, his voice low and steady, almost gentle, asking if she was all right. She opened her mouth, ready to tell him she was fine, that she didn't need help, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she just stood there, breathing hard, rain dripping from her eyelashes. The car idled quietly beside them, the soft hum of the engine the only sound between them. She didn't trust him. She couldn't afford to trust anyone. but something in his tone made her pause. He didn't sound like the men who yelled from doorways or followed her on dark streets. There was no edge of impatience or mockery in his voice. Still, her mind screamed caution. A gust of wind swept down the street, rattling a loose sign and making her shiver violently. She shifted her weight, trying to decide whether to move on or answer him. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from exhaustion. She was at her limit, and she knew it. He stayed where he was, not pushing, not stepping out of the car, just watching her with that same steady gaze. For a moment, she wondered why he hadn't already driven off. Then, through the blur of rain and city lights, she saw his hand move toward something in the seat beside him, and her pulse spiked, unsure of what he would pull out. He stepped out of the car slowly, careful not to startle her. The rain tapped against the black hood of his coat, droplets rolling down onto the wet pavement. His polished shoes splashed in the shallow water as he walked toward her, but his pace was unhurried, almost cautious, as if he wanted her to know she could walk away at any moment. She instinctively took a step back, clutching her bag to her chest. Her breath quickened, and her eyes darted to the side, scanning for an escape route. He stopped a few feet away, leaving space between them, his voice calm as he repeated the question. Was she all right? She opened her mouth, ready to give the same answer she'd given strangers before, the automatic lie that everything was fine. But the truth slipped out before she could stop it. I have nowhere to go, she whispered, her voice nearly swallowed by the rain. Something shifted in his expression. His sharp, businesslike features softened, and for a moment he didn't speak. It was as if he was weighing her words, trying to understand the weight behind them. She regretted saying it instantly, wishing she could take it back. Admitting weakness to a stranger felt dangerous. Her muscles tensed, ready to run if his reaction turned wrong. Instead, he glanced back at his car and then at her, speaking in a quiet, even tone. He said he had been driving behind her for several blocks, watching as she struggled with the wind and rain. He told her he couldn't just drive past without checking if she was okay. His words didn't sound rehearsed, and there was no hint of impatience. But she had learned long ago that appearances could lie. Men with smooth words had hurt her before. She shook her head, muttering a thank you, but told him she couldn't accept help. She turned away, taking a step down the street, her wet shoes making a dull slap on the pavement. The sound of his footsteps followed, steady and deliberate, making her chest tighten. Her pace quickened, but the weight of her pregnancy slowed her. Every step made her lower back ache. She could hear him just a short distance behind, not trying to catch up too quickly, but close enough that she could feel his presence. It made her nervous, but something about the steadiness of his pace told her he wasn't trying to chase her. He was trying not to scare her. When she glanced over her shoulder, she saw that his hands were visible, resting loosely at his sides. He didn't carry himself like a man looking for trouble. Still, she didn't trust it. She had been followed before by people who seemed harmless at first. She reached the corner of the street and stopped, unsure which way to go. Ahead was another dark, empty road. To the right, the lights of the main avenue glowed, but the sidewalks there would be crowded with strangers who might not be any safer. She felt trapped between two bad options. He closed the distance between them slightly, pulling something from his coat pocket. Her heart thudded in panic until she saw what it was. A small white plastic card. He held it out toward her. The logo of a luxury hotel was printed in gold on its surface. His voice was steady as he explained that he had already booked a suite for the night in her name. She stared at the card, confused. A stranger offering a warm bed sounded too good to be real, and in her world, things that sounded too good to be real usually came with a price. Her fingers twitched, tempted to take it, but she kept her arms folded tightly. He seemed to read her hesitation. He said she didn't need to give him anything in return. He wouldn't ask for her number, her name, or anything else. The room was paid for. She could just walk in, rest, eat, and be safe for the night. He even said he would not be there. He would leave after she checked in. Her lips trembled, and she shifted her weight uncomfortably. The cold wind pushed rain down the collar of her coat, and her teeth began to chatter. The thought of a warm, dry bed made her body ache with longing, but memories of broken promises and false kindness made her keep her guard up. She asked why he would do something like this for her, a stranger. His answer was simple: because you look like you need help, and I can help. There was no hesitation in his tone, no attempt to convince her with dramatic words. For a long moment, they just stood there, the rain falling between them. She could hear her own heartbeat, loud in her ears. A car passed on the main road, its headlights sweeping briefly over them before fading away. She finally reached out and took the card, her fingers brushing against his. His hands were warm despite the cold night. He gave a small nod, as if to say she had made the right choice. Then he stepped back, putting the space between them again. He pointed toward the end of the street, where the hotel's sign glowed faintly in the distance. He told her to go straight there, hand the card to the front desk, and everything would be ready for her. He promised she would not see him there. She clutched the card in her hand, still not sure if she could believe any of this. But the exhaustion in her body and the steady ache in her feet made the decision for her. She gave a small nod, turned toward the hotel, and began walking. He didn't follow. She glanced back once and saw him standing in the rain, watching only to make sure she was heading in the right direction. His face was unreadable in the dim light. Her steps were slow at first, her mind running through every possible risk. But with each step closer to the glowing hotel sign, a flicker of warmth grew inside her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this night would end differently than she had feared. The hotel's bright lights spilled onto the wet pavement, casting a warm glow that seemed to push back the darkness of the night. She stopped outside the glass doors, her heart pounding as she stared at her own reflection, drenched hair clinging to her cheeks, coat dripping water onto the ground, one hand protectively resting on her belly. She almost turned away, afraid of being told she didn't belong here. The golden letters of the hotel's name gleamed above her, and through the glass she could see a chandelier dripping with crystal light. Guests in dry, clean clothes moved through the lobby, their shoes clicking softly on polished floors. She looked down at her own muddy shoes and hesitated. The key card in her hand felt heavier than it should have. She still wondered if it was a trick, if the front desk clerk would take one look at her and call security. Her stomach twisted, not from hunger this time, but from the fear of humiliation. She almost shoved the card into her pocket and walked away. But a cold gust of wind swept around the corner, cutting through her wet clothes and making her shiver so violently that her knees buckled. The thought of turning back into that darkness made her gather what little courage she had left. She pushed the glass door open and stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around her instantly, carrying the faint scent of fresh flowers and something sweet she couldn't name. The lobby was quiet, the thick carpet muffling her footsteps. She approached the front desk, her voice low as she slid the card across the counter. The young woman behind the desk smiled politely and checked the computer. To her surprise, the clerk's expression didn't change when she looked up again. "Your room is ready," the clerk said softly, handing the card back along with a folded paper. "There's also a dinner service already arranged. You can order anything you like tonight." For a moment, she didn't move. She was waiting for the part where someone would say there had been a mistake or that she had to pay. But it didn't come. Instead, a bellboy appeared at her side, lifting her bag from her hands as if it weighed nothing, and gestured toward the elevator. She followed in silence, still unsure if she was dreaming. The elevator opened onto a quiet hallway with soft lights and thick carpet. When the bellboy unlocked the door, she stepped into the suite and froze. The room was enormous, twice the size of the tiny apartment she used to rent. A king-sized bed stood in the center, covered in layers of white blankets that looked softer than clouds. Heavy curtains framed the windows, and a small table was set near the wall with a vase of fresh flowers. Her fingers trembled as she reached out to touch the bedspread. She had been sleeping on thin mattresses in crowded shelters for weeks, sometimes even on the floor. The idea of lying down on something so clean, so soft, made her eyes burn. The bellboy set her bag down gently, asked if she needed anything else, and left with a polite nod. She stood in the middle of the room, listening to the quiet. No shouting, no traffic, just the soft hum of the heater. Minutes later, there was a knock at the door. She opened it cautiously, half expecting to see the man from earlier. But it was a hotel staff member with a tray covered by silver domes. The smell of hot soup, fresh bread, and roasted chicken filled the air the moment the lids were lifted. Steam curled up toward her face, and her stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten a real meal in days. She sat at the table and took a tentative sip of the soup. It was hot and rich, the warmth spreading through her chest and into her cold hands. She ate slowly at first, as if afraid the food would vanish if she didn't savor it. But hunger quickly took over, and she finished everything on the tray, wiping the bread through the last drops of soup. She leaned back in the chair, her body already starting to relax in a way it hadn't in weeks. She realized then that the man had kept his word. He wasn't at the door. He hadn't followed her here. He had simply given her this without asking for anything. She moved to the bathroom, where the white tiles gleamed under bright lights. The tub was deep, and bottles of soap and shampoo stood neatly on the shelf. She turned on the hot water and stepped in, letting the heat soak into her bones. Dirt and rainwater swirled down the drain, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt clean. When she finally pulled on one of the thick hotel robes, she padded barefoot back to the bed. She sat on the edge for a moment, still not believing it was hers for the night. Slowly, she lay back against the pillows, her body sinking into the softness. She could feel the baby's gentle movements again, and relief washed over her. The warmth of the blankets surrounded her, and the steady hum of the heater was like a lullaby. Before sleep claimed her, she thought about the man's face, the way he had looked at her without pity and without judgment. She still didn't know his name. She didn't know why he had helped her. But as her eyes closed, she realized something. This was the first night in a long time she didn't feel completely alone. She woke to the sound of soft knocking, unsure at first where she was. The warm weight of the blanket reminded her, and she opened her eyes to see sunlight filtering through the heavy curtains. For a moment, she just lay there, listening to the quiet. No cold wind, no street noise, no footsteps from strangers passing too close. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh bread. She pushed herself up slowly, feeling the stiffness in her back ease in the comfort of the mattress. The knock came again, followed by a voice announcing room service. She hesitated, wondering if there had been some mistake, but then remembered what the front desk had said the night before. When she opened the door, a hotel staff member wheeled in a cart with covered dishes. The scent of eggs, toast, and warm pastries filled the room. She stepped aside as they set everything neatly on the table, their polite smiles making her feel like she belonged here, even if only for a short while. She ate slowly, sipping the hot coffee between bites. Every mouthful seemed to bring back a little of the strength she had lost in the weeks of struggling on the streets. She was careful not to rush, wanting to make the moment last. Afterwards, she took another long, hot shower, letting the water wash away the ache in her shoulders and the fear that still lingered from the cold, wet night before. The day passed quietly. She curled up in the robe again, sitting by the window and watching the city below. From this high up, the streets looked peaceful. People moved along the sidewalks, cars rolled through intersections, but none of it felt threatening. She thought about the man who had brought her here. His face stayed in her mind, serious, steady, with an expression that was hard to read but somehow safe. She still didn't know why he had helped her, and that question stayed in her chest like a weight. As evening approached, she was startled by the sound of the doorbell in the suite. Her first thought was that it might be a mistake, maybe the wrong room. But when she opened the door, it was him. He stood there holding 2 large shopping bags, his coat still damp from the rain outside. She froze, unsure how to react, but he only gave a small nod and stepped inside when she moved back to let him through. He placed the bags on the bed and began pulling things out. Soft maternity clothes in neutral colors, comfortable shoes, and even a thick winter coat that looked warm enough to face the harshest cold. At the bottom of one bag was a small stuffed bear, its fur golden brown and its black eyes bright. He set it gently on the bedspread as if it were fragile. She stared at everything, her hands hovering over the clothes without touching them. No one had bought her anything in months, not without expecting something in return. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, her voice low. He looked at her, his expression calm but serious. He told her that years ago, before he had money, he had been homeless too. He had slept in his car for weeks, hiding in parking lots and washing up in gas station bathrooms. One night, a stranger had helped him, no questions, no demands, just the way he was helping her now. That kindness had stayed with him, and he had promised himself that if he ever had the chance, he would do the same for someone else. His words were simple, but they reached her in a way she couldn't explain. She felt a tightness in her throat, and she looked away so he wouldn't see her eyes welling up. She managed to thank him, but the words felt too small for what he had done. He stayed only a short while, making sure she had everything she needed. Before leaving, he told her the hotel had been paid for several more nights, and if she needed anything, the front desk would contact him. He didn't give her his number or ask for hers. He simply said, "Rest. That's the most important thing right now," and walked out into the hallway. After the door closed, she sat on the bed surrounded by the new clothes and the soft bear. She ran her fingers over the stitching on the coat, feeling its warmth even without wearing it. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe things could be different. That night, she ate another hot meal brought to her room, then curled up in the new clothes. The baby moved gently inside her, and she pressed a hand to her stomach, whispering that everything was going to be okay. Whether she truly believed it yet or not, she wanted the baby to hear it. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought again about the man's story. It was strange to imagine someone like him, polished, wealthy, confident, sleeping in a car. But maybe that was why he had seen her differently than others did. He knew what it felt like to be cold, tired, and unseen. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible anymore. 2 days passed before she saw him again. She had begun to feel a little more rested, her body no longer aching from constant walking and cold nights. The hotel staff treated her kindly, but she kept to herself, still unsure how long this safety would last. On the third morning, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, he was standing there again, this time without his coat, holding a brown paper bag in one hand and a cardboard box in the other. He stepped inside quietly, placing the bag and box on the table. The smell of fresh fruit and bread filled the air when he opened the bag. Inside were apples, bananas, a loaf of bread, jars of peanut butter and jam, milk, and even a small carton of juice. The box contained neatly folded maternity dresses, leggings, and warm sweaters. She touched the soft fabric, still surprised by the generosity. She asked him again why he was helping her. It wasn't that she was ungrateful, but she couldn't understand why someone like him would care about someone like her. People usually looked at her belly and assumed she had made mistakes, assumed she had done something to deserve the situation she was in. He didn't seem to think that way. He sat down across from her, his hands resting on the table. He told her more of his story. When he was younger, he had been evicted from his apartment after losing his job. He had nowhere to go and no family to turn to. For weeks, he lived out of his car, parking in dark corners of the city where no one would notice him. One freezing night, when he was almost out of gas, a stranger knocked on his window. That stranger didn't ask questions, didn't judge, didn't tell him it was his fault. Instead, they bought him a hot meal and paid for a motel room so he could sleep in a real bed for the first time in weeks. He said he had never forgotten that night, the way it felt to have someone see him as a person and not as a problem. That moment had stayed with him, and when he finally turned his life around, he promised himself that if he ever saw someone else in the same kind of pain, he would help without hesitation. She listened silently, her fingers tracing the stitching on the sweater in her lap. Something inside her softened, though she still kept a small guard up. She thanked him again, and this time it came from a deeper place. She didn't just mean thank you for the food or the clothes. She meant thank you for seeing her. He stood and glanced toward the door as if to leave, but then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in soft tissue paper. He placed it on the table and slid it toward her. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm shaped like a tiny heart. He said it was for the baby, for when the baby was old enough to wear it. She stared at the charm, imagining her child's tiny wrist. For the first time in weeks, a faint smile touched her lips. They talked for a little while longer. He asked if she had been to any doctor appointments recently. She shook her head, embarrassed to admit she hadn't had the money or transportation. He didn't scold her, he only nodded thoughtfully, then said they would take care of that soon. There was no pressure in his voice, just quiet certainty, like it was already settled. Before he left, he told her he would check in again soon. She walked him to the door, watching as he disappeared down the hallway. When the door closed, she leaned against it, feeling a strange mix of relief and confusion. She didn't know what his life was like now, how much his world must differ from hers, but somehow he made her feel like they were on the same side. That night, she placed the bracelet carefully on the nightstand beside her bed. She ate some of the fruit he had brought, then curled up in one of the new sweaters, feeling warmer than she had in a long time. The baby kicked softly, and she rested her hand over her belly, wondering if her child could somehow sense the change in their lives. For the first time in months, she began to imagine a future that wasn't filled only with worry. She didn't know how long his help would last or what would come next, but for now, she had food, warmth, and someone who seemed to care. It was more than she had dared to hope for when she had been standing in the rain that night, telling a stranger she had nowhere to go. She woke in the middle of the night with a sharp pain low in her stomach. At first, she thought it was just the baby shifting, but the pain came again, stronger this time, making her gasp. She sat up slowly, pressing a hand against her belly. A cold wave of fear washed over her. Something didn't feel right. She tried to breathe through it, but the pain didn't fade. Instead, it came in quick bursts, leaving her lightheaded. Her heart started to race. She reached for the phone by the bed and called the hotel front desk. Her voice shook as she told them she needed help, that something was wrong with her pregnancy. Within minutes, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, the man's driver was standing there, his expression serious. He told her they needed to leave immediately. She grabbed her small bag and followed him down to the car, moving as fast as she could despite the pain. The car sped through the quiet streets, the city lights blurring past the windows. She clutched the seatbelt with one hand, the other pressed against her belly. Every bump in the road made her wince. She tried to focus on breathing, counting in her head to keep from panicking. When they pulled up to the hospital, she was surprised to see the man already standing outside, waiting. He rushed to the car, opened her door, and helped her out gently, supporting her with one arm as they hurried inside. Inside the hospital, everything moved quickly. Nurses appeared with a wheelchair, and she was rolled down a long hallway while the man walked beside her, talking to the staff. He signed papers, answered questions, and stayed close, as if he had done this 100 times before. She wanted to ask him why he was there in the middle of the night, but the next wave of pain silenced her. They took her into a small room, hooked her up to machines, and spoke in low voices. She could hear the steady beep of the monitor and the soft swish of the baby's heartbeat. A doctor explained that her body was under stress from malnutrition and exhaustion, and that it had caused complications. She needed to rest and be closely monitored for the next few days. The words made her throat tighten. If she had still been on the streets, she might not have made it here in time. When the nurses stepped out, she turned her head toward him. He was sitting in the chair beside her bed, his coat draped over the back. His hair was damp and his eyes looked tired, but he didn't seem like he planned to leave. She whispered a small thank you, but he shook his head. "Don't thank me," he said quietly. "Just focus on getting better." The hours passed slowly, but he stayed. He brought her water, adjusted her blanket when she shivered, and even spoke softly to the nurse to make sure she had something to eat. It wasn't just his presence, it was the way he seemed to notice everything without being asked. The next morning, the doctor returned to say she and the baby were stable for now. She felt relief flood through her, so strong that tears stung her eyes. She closed them for a moment, letting herself breathe without fear. When she opened them again, he was still there, watching her with that calm, steady look. She asked him why he had come to the hospital himself instead of just sending his driver. He said simply, "Because I knew you'd be scared." There was no pride in his voice, no attempt to make it sound heroic. It was just a fact, spoken plainly, and it made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with the pain from before. Over the next 2 days, he visited every morning and stayed until the nurses convinced him to rest. He brought small things to make her stay easier: a book, fresh fruit, even a soft blanket from the hotel so she would feel more comfortable. They spoke in short conversations between the nurses' visits, and she began to see a different side of him. He was not just a wealthy man with a kind streak. He was someone who noticed the smallest details and remembered them. On the third day, the doctor said she could go home if she took it easy. She felt both relief and worry. The hospital had been safe, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to step back into the world outside. But when she walked out of the room, he was there, waiting with the same steady patience as before. He didn't take her back to the hotel. Instead, he told her he had something else to show her. She sat quietly in the car as they drove, the city rolling past the windows. After about 20 minutes, they pulled up in front of a small apartment building with clean brick walls and potted plants by the entrance. She looked at him in confusion, but he only smiled faintly and got out of the car. He led her up the steps and unlocked a door on the second floor. When she stepped inside, she froze. The apartment was small but bright, with warm-colored walls, a cozy couch, and a neatly made bed. In the kitchen, she saw a refrigerator stocked with food. The cupboards were full. She turned toward him, her mouth opening to ask what this was, but he spoke first. "It's yours," he said. "Paid for 6 months in advance. You can rest here, be safe, and prepare for the baby." Her knees felt weak, and she gripped the edge of the table for balance. She didn't know what to say. No one had ever done something like this for her. He stepped closer, not crowding her, but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "Everyone deserves a safe place to start over," he said softly. She blinked back tears and nodded, unable to speak. For a long time, she had felt like she was drifting without direction, waiting for the next bad thing to happen. But now, standing in the warmth of that small apartment, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. She stood in the middle of the small apartment, her eyes moving from the couch to the bed to the tiny kitchen, trying to take it all in. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the faint scent of new furniture. The curtains were clean and soft, swaying slightly from the breeze coming through an open window. A small dining table sat in the corner with 2 chairs and a bowl of bright red apples in the center. She couldn't remember the last time she had walked into a space that felt like it was meant just for her. Her hand rested on her belly as the baby shifted inside, almost as if sensing the change. She walked slowly toward the kitchen, opening cupboards to find them filled with rice, pasta, canned soup, and cereal. The refrigerator hummed softly, its shelves lined with milk, juice, eggs, vegetables, and cheese. She ran her fingers over the cold surface of a milk carton, still unsure if she was dreaming. When she turned around, he was watching her with a quiet expression, leaning against the doorway. He didn't look for thanks, didn't look proud. He simply looked like he wanted to be sure she felt safe. "It's not big, but it's yours," he said. "You don't owe me anything. Just take care of yourself and the baby." Her throat tightened. Words felt too small for what she wanted to say. Instead, she nodded, blinking back tears. She thought about all the nights she had spent on the street, counting coins in her pocket and wondering if she could make them stretch to buy a piece of bread. Now she had walls to protect her, a lock on the door, and a bed to sleep in. He walked over to the counter and placed a small envelope there. "That's for emergencies," he explained. "It's not much, but it should help if you need something right away." She glanced at it, knowing that not much probably meant more than she had seen in years. She wanted to refuse, to tell him she couldn't take more. But the truth was, she might need it, and he seemed to understand that without her saying a word. They spent the next hour walking through the apartment together. He showed her how the heating worked, where the spare blankets were kept, and even how to open the tricky bathroom window without it sticking. Each detail felt strange to her. No one had ever taken the time to make sure she knew how to use the things in a place she was staying. Before he left, he stood by the door for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I'll check in from time to time," he said, "but this is your home now. You decide who comes in, who doesn't. It's your space." She nodded again, gripping the edge of her sweater. When he stepped out into the hallway, she watched the door close slowly behind him. For a long time, she didn't move. She just stood there, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of the city outside the window. When night came, she made herself a simple meal from the food he had stocked: scrambled eggs, toast, and a glass of juice. She ate at the small table, the warmth of the food spreading through her. Afterward, she tidied the kitchen, wanting to keep everything as perfect as it had been when she arrived. She wandered into the bedroom and sat on the bed. The sheets smelled fresh, the pillows soft under her hands. She lay down slowly, her body sinking into the mattress. The baby kicked lightly, and she placed her hand there, whispering that they were safe now. She didn't know if the future would stay like this, but for the first time in months, she could sleep without fear. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains. She woke naturally, not to the sound of traffic or strangers' voices, but to silence. She made herself breakfast and sat by the window, watching the street below. People walked their dogs, children laughed on their way to school, and she realized she could be part of a normal life again. A few days later, there was a soft knock on the door. She opened it to find him standing there, holding a grocery bag in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. He stepped inside and placed the bag on the counter, filled with fresh vegetables, bread, and a jar of honey. The paper was a list of nearby clinics and doctors who could provide prenatal care. "I've already called a few of them," he said. "You have an appointment next week. They'll check on you and the baby." She stared at the paper, her throat tightening again. She had been worried about her health, but she hadn't known how to find the help she needed. Now someone had done it for her, not because they wanted anything back, but because they cared. They sat at the table and talked for a while. She told him a little about her life before the streets, about the small apartment she used to have, the job she lost, and the people who slowly stopped answering her calls. He listened without interrupting, his eyes never drifting away. It felt strange to speak the words out loud after keeping them locked inside for so long. When he left that day, she stood at the window watching him walk down the street. The evening light caught on his dark coat, and for a moment she thought about how different their lives were. Yet somehow their paths had crossed in a way that had changed everything. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized something. She no longer felt like she was just surviving. She was beginning to live again. And while she didn't know what the future held, she knew that this apartment, this safety, and this unexpected kindness had given her something she thought she had lost forever: hope. Weeks passed, and the days began to feel different. The cold fear that used to sit heavy in her chest was slowly replaced by a quiet calm. She went to her doctor's appointments, ate regular meals, and rested without the constant worry of where she would sleep next. Each time the baby kicked, it felt like a small reminder that life was moving forward. She still thought often about the night she had been standing in the rain with nowhere to go, wondering how close she had been to giving up completely. The apartment became her safe place. She learned the sound of the creaky floorboard near the kitchen and the way sunlight spilled into the living room in the late morning. She hung up a few photos she had kept in her bag, wrinkled and worn from the streets. The small stuffed bear he had given her sat on the dresser, waiting for the baby's arrival. Every now and then, there would be a knock on the door, and he would be there, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with fresh flowers, and sometimes with nothing at all except a quiet check to see how she was doing. The day finally came when the first pain started. It was early morning, and she was making tea, and a sharp cramp caught her by surprise. At first, she thought it might be false labor, but the pains grew stronger and closer together. She remembered the doctor's instructions, took her bag, and called for help. Not long after, she heard the knock on her door. When she opened it, he was standing there, his car already running downstairs. He drove her to the hospital quickly but carefully, speaking to her in calm tones between each contraction. She focused on his voice, using it to steady her breathing. At the hospital, nurses rushed her into a room, and the hours that followed blurred into a mix of pain, determination, and the steady rhythm of voices guiding her through. He stayed nearby, sometimes stepping out when the nurses needed space, but always returning, his presence like a constant anchor in the chaos. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, she heard the sound she had been waiting for, a cry, small at first but growing louder, stronger. The nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket. The baby's face was pink and wrinkled, eyes blinking against the light. She felt her own tears spill over as she whispered a greeting. All the cold nights, all the fear, all the loneliness, they felt distant now, pushed aside by the warmth in her arms. He stepped closer, his eyes soft as he looked at the baby. He didn't try to take the child from her. Instead, he simply stood beside the bed, watching quietly. After a while, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small gift box. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet engraved with the baby's name. He placed it on the bedside table, saying it could wait until the child was older. Over the next 2 days, he visited often, bringing flowers for her room and small essentials for the baby, diapers, blankets, and bottles. The nurses began to assume he was a family member, and in a way, it felt true. She realized that without him, she might not have made it here at all. When the hospital finally discharged her, he was there with the car seat already installed, ready to take them home. The ride back to the apartment was quiet, except for the occasional soft sound from the baby in the back. She sat in the passenger seat, watching the city go by, thinking about how different the world looked now. At the apartment, he helped carry everything inside. She laid the baby gently in the crib she had prepared, standing for a long moment just watching the small chest rise and fall. The afternoon light spilled over the tiny figure, making everything feel even more peaceful. She turned to him then, wanting to find the right words, but everything she thought of felt too small compared to what he had done. She remembered how she had told him that first night, "I have nowhere to go," and how now, weeks later, she stood in a home with her newborn child safe beside her. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke, telling him that he had changed everything. He shook his head slightly, as if to brush away the idea. "You did the hard part," he said. "You kept going." But she knew the truth. Without his help, she might not have had the chance to keep going at all. Before he left that evening, he paused at the door, looking back at her and the baby. "If you ever need anything, you know how to reach me," he said. She nodded, and this time she didn't feel the urge to hide her emotions. After the door closed, she sat on the couch, the baby cradled in her arms. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft breathing of the little one. She looked around at the walls, the furniture, the stocked kitchen, all the pieces of safety she hadn't imagined having again. She thought about how his help had never come with conditions, how he had never asked for anything in return. He hadn't done it for praise or recognition, and most of the world would never know what he had done. But she would remember every detail, the sound of his voice that night in the rain, the feel of the hotel robe around her shoulders, the warmth of the apartment he had given her, and the steady presence that had carried her through. She bent her head and kissed the baby's forehead, whispering a promise to give this child the safe, loving life she had almost lost hope of providing. Somewhere deep down, she also made another promise, to pass on the same kind of kindness one day to someone who needed it as badly as she once had. The city outside moved on as always, but inside that small apartment, everything felt new. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer crushed her. She had a future now, and it had begun the moment a stranger in an expensive suit had stopped his car on a rainy night and done the unexpected.